I'm really happy and excited to be speaking about citizenship on Constitution Day. And I'm excited to share with you what I've learned. So without further ado, there's a lot to cover, so I'll start. First, a clarification. What this talk is not about, it is not about partisan politics, but it is about something much more foundational, and that being politics in the classical sense, the polis, the city, and citizenship. So I'll talk a few highlights about the history of citizenship, why it's important, why it's in jeopardy, and some other thoughts later about language and how it pertains to our citizenship. And then I want to propose some ideas on how to be a better citizen, not just state the problem. I don't like that. I want to have some solutions. Okay? So what got me started on this was several years ago, maybe even a decade ago, there was a woman who was a victim of the IRS illegally blocking the filing status of her 501c3, her nonprofit, and because it was of ideological opposition. She testified to a congressional committee, halting her testimony with a heated exclamation, "I am a citizen, not a subject." And it's been a long time since I'd heard those two words in the same sentence, right? It caught my attention. We often hear the word resident or non-resident, but rarely do we focus on the actual word citizen. So I started to study a little bit more about what that really meant. In his book, The Dying Citizen, Stanford University historian Victor Davis Hanson reminds us that the idea of citizenship is rather new in terms of world history. Being a citizen basically means legally belonging to a country and having all the rights and responsibilities that go with it. But it's not something that everyone across human history has had, or even has now in the 21st century. I think we take that for granted. Most people throughout the world were slaves, or serfs, peasants, but citizens had special rights and unique responsibilities. Paul of Tarsus in first century Rome, you may recall, was a citizen of Rome. And this is why when he was charged with a crime he did not commit, he had that privilege as a citizen of appealing to Caesar to hear his case, rather than be heard back in Jerusalem and tried by local partisan officials. But before going any further, I'd like to quickly review what many scholars refer to as the four pillars of civilization, Western civilization, that includes citizenship. So in so doing, I hope to provide a background for the connection between citizenship, property ownership, and freedom. These four pillars can be represented by bringing to mind four cities. That's how I remember those. So pillar one is Jerusalem. Jerusalem represents biblical truths that include the golden rule to treat others the way you'd like yourself to be treated. But it also includes human dignity. And that human dignity, in a world of clans and tribes and slaves, the Bible introduced the very idea of and the power of the individual. And in fact, that is from Senator Josh Hawley in a Federalist article just yesterday. He was talking about the power of the individual that came through those biblical truths. Man has a special dignity. The 10 Commandments were given to the Israelites, but they were, as a people, but they were directed toward individuals. So pillar one, Jerusalem, biblical truths. Pillar two, Athens. The ancient Greeks developed the study of reason, logic, and discourse with a focus on virtue. And that was the exchange of ideas in pursuit of the truth. And here I just want to make a plug for Plato's Cave and Aristotle's Nicomachean Ethics. Greek wisdom will change your life. They are as relevant today as they were in ancient Greece and should be read by every person. I did not read that in college. I just read it lately. So Athens also gave rise to democracy, literally meaning rule of the people. As part of this democracy, Greek citizens took an active role in the government of their city-state. All citizens could vote, but only property owners could be citizens. caveat there. In addition to voting, a citizen was required to pay taxes and serve in the military. So, pillar number 2, Athens, to form clear thinking and virtuous citizens. In short, democracy and discourse. Pillar 3 is Rome. Rome adopted and adapted Greek ideas and added the rule of law, which was written down, known to all, and applied to all citizens. There was a body of common laws that applied to all these Roman citizens. So the rule of law is essential for justice because it helps avoid punishment being meted out by a tyrannical king, the whim of a king, a Caesar, a president, or a dictator. Roman law provides the basic framework for American civil law. So pillar 3, Rome, rule of law. Pillar 4 can be remembered by London. The Magna Carta in 1215 was a document that a reluctant King John signed, agreeing to the barons' personal and property rights. And among these we know were protection of church rights, property rights, protection of illegal imprisonment, access to swift justice, limits on feudal payments, taxes. Okay, so pillar 4, London, human and property rights. And if these ideas sound familiar, they should, right? What we refer to as Western civilization developed from these 4 pillars: biblical truths, democracy and discourse, rule of law, human and property rights. Now also referred to as Greco-Roman Judeo-Christian heritage and values. Most of America's founding fathers had a classical education, which consists in these 4 pillars. So you can see how the 4 pillars guided the founding fathers in the writing of the Declaration of Independence and the Constitution. In these ancient civilizations, citizenship was and remains the unique mechanism to determine who can vote, who can serve in the military, who pays taxes, and who is protected under the law. In his Western Conservative Summit on Citizenship a couple of years ago, Victor Davis Hanson asserts that the importance of citizenship, especially here in America, cannot be overstated. And one of his reasons I found interesting is because citizenship gave rise to the middle class. Now, why is this important? Well, if you were really poor, you depended on the benevolence of the rich, or you became a ward of the state, and you relied on government handouts, right? And you stayed poor. There was no opportunity for upward mobility if you weren't a citizen. The rich were powerful and influential and free to live their lives, to be generous or not. But the truly revolutionary idea of citizenship produced an empowered, self-reliant, independent middle class. As citizens, people now had legal status, which carried with it, among other things, the right to pass on their property to their heirs, which means they could build wealth and have that upward mobility. That's really important, right? The importance of property here cannot be underestimated. Each of the 4 pillars emphasize property as a fundamental right. We don't think about this often, but the 10 Commandments states, "Thou shalt not steal." That implies a right to property. It assumes something is owned. Athens and Rome had civil laws about stealing. Property ownership was a criteria for citizenship. And of course, the barons resisted King John confiscating their property. So I'll put this more bluntly: nobody can steal your stuff. It was wrong in ancient times, and it's still wrong now, whether it's by a person or a government bureaucracy. The current media chatter about the Great Reset boasts that you'll own nothing and be happy. And that flies in the face of 5,000 years of human history and human nature, right? There's a brief side note here. In the original language of the Declaration of Independence, some wanted Jefferson to refer to life, liberty, and property. But later that was considered too narrow and was then changed to a broader phrase, pursuit of happiness, which was understood to include property. That's an Aristotelian concept too, and he was trained in Aristotle. So property is foundational to citizenship, which was essential to creating a middle class. Well, let's continue. City-states had borders, and I think that's my phone. I am so naughty. Should have been like a theater, turn off your phones. So city-states had borders, and so obviously you were a citizen of one or the other. As mentioned earlier, this citizenship carried with it a military obligation, and this was to protect those borders, right? So there was an element of loyalty and community further safeguarding your property from being seized or vandalized by another person or country. So now with this ability to create wealth, citizens carved out an autonomous livelihood. And this idea of citizenship began to spread throughout parts of Europe and eventually to the United States. There are about 190 countries in the world today, and less than half of them have a constitution and true citizenship. That's from Dr. David Sampson. I didn't know that before. Our Constitution is 233 years old. So just another side note about the middle class, there was a recent Pew Research study that indicated in 1971 in this country, the middle class accounted for 61% of the population, and it's been shrinking steadily. In 2021, it was barely 50%. So in less than one generation, the American middle class has shrunk to not even half our population. The change is in the explosion of the very, very low income sector who are now government dependent and stuck, and the very high income range, the so-called 1%ers. Besides the historical and economic aspect of giving rise to the middle class, what else is so important about American citizenship? Well, I think an interesting field trip would be to take a group of students to see the scores of people becoming naturalized. Okay? Sadly, the only people who take the oath to be naturalized, to my knowledge, are the naturalized citizens themselves, are military, law enforcement, and elected officials. In America, anyone who officially takes the citizenship test and professes this oath of loyalty can become a citizen. Now, it's more complicated than that. You have to live here 5 years and have a job and all that. But that's not so in other countries. I can't go to China and say, I want to be a citizen, okay? Nor would I want to. Or let's say, if I speak fluent French, artfully prepare French cuisine, and even live in France for decades, I would still never be French, right? But a Frenchman can come here, take the citizenship test, take the oath of allegiance, and voila, an American. No pun intended. And why is that? Because America is an idea. It's not an ethnicity, right? We are still a melting pot. We are constructed and we're based on ideas. Ideas grounded in the 4 pillars: biblical truths, democracy and discourse, rule of law, human and property rights. Now, what else is so special? Well, the Declaration of Independence states emphatically that the truths of our inalienable right to life, liberty, and pursuit of happiness are self-evident. So that's a reference to biblical truths and natural law, meaning nobody has to explain it to you. By the fact that you're a person, you understand right from wrong. And these are very fundamental ideas. And that's why I really like Hans Christian Andersen's The Emperor Has No Clothes. It's the best illustration of natural law. The Declaration of Independence further states that government does not give these rights, but government exists to secure and protect these rights. And these rights we know are from God. Our government created a constitution then to include citizenship as a mechanism to safeguard these rights. However, in his essay, The Meaning of American Citizenship, Carson Holloway makes a distinction between natural rights and political rights. Natural rights are ascribed to all human beings. So the Constitution protects non-citizens and citizens, the non-citizens who visit or reside here, whereas political rights belong solely to citizens. What does this mean? Holloway points out that in the Federalist Papers, number 84, Alexander Hamilton doesn't refer often to the rights of citizens, but about the political privileges of the citizens, and the structure and administration of the government. In other words, the Constitution describes citizens as those people who have the proper authority with which they can vote, they can hold elected office, they can sit on a jury and decide another citizen's or non-citizen's fate. This is very powerful. A citizen and only a citizen can exercise this authority and power over others and even a whole community. So we as citizens have power not derived from our physical might or riots, but we have power and authority derived from our constitutional authority. It's imperative that this power and authority be exercised virtuously. And that's why founding fathers, as different as Thomas Jefferson and Alexander Hamilton, insisted that America should bestow its citizenship very cautiously. And they did. The Constitution details clearly that only citizens can hold public office and spells out the criteria thereof. So some of us already know that it spells out you have to be 30 years old to be a representative, and you have to live in the country X number of years. I need to read that again. And senators have to be 35, etc. The Founding Fathers identified 3 marks of a good citizen: voting, virtue, and vigilance. The first quality of a good citizen is that she votes. That's one reason why we fought the revolution, right? The right to representation and to restore those God-given rights. One person, one vote is still sacred to our governance. And that's why election integrity is critical to exercising our citizenship. It's supposed to be the premier example of the unity of our country. While our nation's diversity is good, our founding fathers also emphasized the unity that citizenship demands. It's a unity that respects the capacity to uphold the principles of our political way of life. And it's actually expressed in the very name of our country, the United States of America, and our motto, E pluribus unum. Did I pronounce that right? I'm not Latin. The second mark of a good citizen is virtue. If a vast majority of citizens exercise their power with virtue, the system works, right? Our founding fathers emphasized the virtue that comes from reading, thinking, being informed, logic, and discourse. Pillar 2. And they understood that while having the potential for great good, people also have the potential and the capacity for great evil. And so liberty depends on citizens with reason and virtue. Self-government is for those who can govern self. James Madison emphasized that our Constitution requires sufficient virtue for self-government. The third mark of a good citizen is vigilance. The Founding Fathers believed the citizens themselves are responsible for safeguarding their liberties. They knew government was downstream from culture and warned us to be vigilant of those who would trade our liberty for protection, security, and comfort. That rings a bell, doesn't it? Okay. It does get more positive. To repeat, citizenship is a mechanism by which we are virtuous and vigilant stewards of our liberties, not limited to just pleading our rights, although that's important right now, but tasked with safeguarding them. But many Americans have unwittingly abdicated the practice of good citizenship. What does this look like? Well, let's start with the 4 pillars: biblical truths, democracy and discourse, rule of law, and human rights. Well, there are many who no longer believe in biblical truths, right? That's true for you, but not for me. And if I steal something, I made a note to myself this morning. If I steal from someone who believes there is no truth, they're going to change their mind real fast. And the belief in God, the 10 Commandments, right? Or the other truth is people who are functionally illiterate or refuse to engage in logical discourse, pillar 2, and resort to name-calling and canceling their opponents. Education is often more focused on knowledge of things, not knowledge of truth, or restricted to how to make a living, not how to be happy. Many in our ruling class now have rules for thee, not for me. Pillar 3. Okay. Law enforcement is no longer based on committing a crime in search of evidence, but looking for evidence in search of a crime. Alan Dershowitz just said that a couple weeks ago, something we all know about. Rule of law is twisted, manipulated, and selectively applied based on one's ideology, leading Victor Davis Hanson just a month ago to state, we no longer have rule of law. The self-evident rights of life, liberty, and pursuit of happiness seem to no longer be self-evident and have morphed into this plethora of ambiguous rights that include the right not to be offended, but no longer an innate right to life or liberty or happiness that comes from keeping your business open. Both Hamilton and Thomas Jefferson agreed that all tyranny needs to gain a foothold is for good conscience and virtue to remain silent. And then there's voting. And this is my thing. In a typical spring election, you would be surprised to know that only 20%, not even 20% of the registered voters bother to vote. All the issues most affecting us, these are local issues, property taxes, zoning laws, building codes, local ordinances, law enforcement and safety, education of our children, pornography in our libraries, and multiple offenders given low or no bail by district attorneys. Yet only local elections are being determined by less than 20% of the registered voters. The Founding Fathers warned of this and how important it is to vote. And when former Secretary of State Mike Pompeo was at the Steamboat Institute in Colorado a couple of years ago, he said the most serious internal threat, there are external threats, we know about those. The most serious internal threat to America now is education. Literacy and logic, knowledge of our history, and American principles of freedom and education and virtue. Never have Brookfield Academy's 5 stars been more important. Character, heritage, intellect, heritage, individuality, and truth. All right. I'm sorry. You got it. I didn't go to VA, my kids did. So without voting in virtue, being vigilant and safeguarding our liberties is nearly impossible, right? But why else is citizenship in jeopardy? Again, I refer to Victor Davis Hanson book, The Dying Citizen. He cites 2 tactics currently being used to erode citizenship. And I think there are more. I haven't finished reading the book. Number 1, who has the right to vote? And 2, the move toward mobilization. Let's take number 1. Voting has always been the hallmark of a right and privilege of citizens, right? And that's being challenged. Not only because citizens themselves have failed to vote, but the voting process is being compromised. Voting by mail and with no ID would jeopardize the right and duty to vote afforded to citizens only. There'd be no way to track who is voting, much less if a person is a citizen. And then a recent proposal in New York to allow non-citizens the ability to vote, thankfully about 2 months ago it was struck down by the state court, but you know it's going to resurge again. Now, a reminder, this is not a diss on non-citizens. Remember, the U.S. Constitution protects non-citizens, but it's a citizen's responsibility to protect the Constitution. The Electoral College is being challenged, which would completely nullify our votes here in Wisconsin, and America would no longer be a representative republic. The Electoral College allows for each state to have a certain number of electoral votes according to its population. If we eliminated the Electoral College and had only the popular vote, there'd be no need for presidential candidates to come to Wisconsin. We'd be flyover country. Or for smaller states, they would simply campaign in the highly populated states of Florida, Texas, New York, and California. And that's not democracy, that's mob rule. And just a side note here, as a reminder, we are not a pure democracy. That word is being thrown around a lot. America is a constitutional representative republic. We have democratic elements to elect our representatives and in many other aspects, but we're not a pure democracy. Second, globalization is destroying the very essence of citizenship. Being a world citizen offers no rights and privileges, only responsibilities and the expectation of following the rules. As one author put it, I am a citizen of a country, not a member of the world collective. And I wish I could remember who that was. Ideally, the privilege of a citizen is living in a nation that is accountable to its citizens, right? Citizens, but we have to actively guard it. Globalists are not accountable to world citizens, and no mechanism exists for that accountability. In a global society, how do you pursue justice? Who do you go to? Moreover, global citizenship and global governance is the opposite of the principle of subsidiarity. Subsidiarity means a community of a higher order should not interfere in the internal life of a community of a lower order, depriving it of its functions. Larger communities should not usurp the family's prerogative or interfere in its life. So essentially, for example, local school boards and local governments are an example of this principle of subsidiarity in action. And all of that is being threatened by federal overreach or state overreach. It's violating that principle of subsidiarity and the autonomy that comes with county government, city government, and local school boards. You know, the smaller it gets, the more you have control over it and say. There is a history to this globalist progressive movement. That's kind of a weird word, progressive now. It's taken on a whole meaning, right? I'm going to digress and just put this in context a little bit. The French Revolution Universal Rights of Man document from 1789 is a document not based on any religious doctrine or any authority except nature. Emerging from the Enlightenment period, the French social contract claimed the origin of man's rights is from the state, not God. And that man is the source of the law, not God. It completely rejects Pillar 1 biblical truths. Specifically in Article 6, it states, the law is the expression of the general will of the people. Well, we know how that turned out. 40,000 French were sent to the guillotine by the will of the people. Truth of the hereafter was rejected for the truth of the here and now. Another example, more contemporary, is the post-World War II document, the UN Declaration on Human Rights. In the preamble, I'm going to read this and then I'll go back and just punch some holes in it. The preamble states, whereas human beings shall enjoy freedom of speech and belief, and freedom from fear and want as the highest aspiration of the common people, human rights should be protected by the rule of law. At face value, that seems okay, right? But it doesn't say, it says human beings, it doesn't say citizens, and it doesn't refer to men and women. Shall enjoy freedom of speech and belief, but it doesn't say who or what to believe, especially God. And freedom from fear and want as the highest aspiration of the common people. Why do they write common people? Is it the common people or is it the elites? Then in Article 21, subsection 3, so buried in there, it says, quote, the will of the people shall be the basis of the authority of government. This will shall be expressed in periodic and genuine elections, which shall be by universal and equal suffrage, and shall be held by secret vote or equivalent free voting procedures. But is the will of the people the authority of government in a globalist world? What is meant by equivalent free voting procedures? And how do you monitor that? With the declaration, the UN declaration, and as we drift away from natural law into kind of designing our own consciences and a kind of self-deification, new artificial rights are being created all the time that directly contradict the natural law and human rights, genuine human rights. As author and scholar Charles Chaput wrote, this globalism asks us to see ourselves almost solely in economic terms. It reduces people to stateless, homeless consumers, not citizens. For we have to be fully engaged as citizens of a community, not faceless members of a collective. And current trends and events toward global citizenship create citizen workers unable or unwilling to be free. In sharp contrast to these historical revolutions, the American Revolution was a synthesis of the four pillars, right? Our founding fathers relied on God and entrusted America to his providence. The highest aspiration is not freedom from fear and want, all right, but it's for life, liberty, and pursuit of happiness. We are human beings with a mind and a soul, not just a body with appetites and desires. And our constitutional basis of authority is God and his divine law and natural law that the founders knew both farmer and the framers, plowmen, and professors understood. The divine law is the ultimate source of all laws and provides a limit for man's laws. So our Constitution is intended to protect everyone's natural rights and protect our American sovereignty that should never be subordinate to global interests. Now, in America, we have a variety of new and interesting words and phrases describing citizen, non-citizen. We have undocumented worker, alien. We don't hear that too much anymore. I was an alien when I lived in Canada. That was my status. 13-year-old alien. Anchor babies, refugees, asylum seekers, legal and illegal. The word resident is often used synonymously with citizen, yet a resident is not a citizen. Doing so clouds the distinction between citizens' rights due to citizens and privileges gratuitously given to non-citizens. And this, I think, is an abuse of language, and it further erodes our understanding of what constitutes citizenship. This interchangeability between resident and citizen is a corruption of language. So I'm going to digress a little bit, if I have time. Do I have time? Okay. That brings me to some thoughts about language, about citizenship, and the abuse of language that undermines the four pillars. George Orwell, the dystopian novelist who wrote 1984, he wrote this: "Thought can corrupt language, but language can also corrupt thought. Political language," he said, "is designed to make lies sound truthful and murder respectable." Orwell believed that the language used is necessarily vague or meaningless because it was intended to hide the truth rather than express it. And he wrote this in 1946, okay? Less than 2 decades later, Mao called his Chinese Revolution the Great Leap Forward. There was nothing great or forward about murdering 60 million Chinese people for their political views. And one of the tactics he used was to redefine the language. He believed that words are things you manipulate. And this is a quote: "We will conquer the world because you fools think that words are labels that are properly or improperly pasted onto things. We know that words are little dynamite sticks in people's minds, and we hold the fuse." So lies and deception were institutionalized through language. And why does this matter? Because language abuse is dehumanizing, because intentionally misusing words treats a person as an object to be manipulated, not someone to be respected. Biblical truths. Pillar 1. You're not going to forget that, right? Good. So language has to correspond with reality, or society will be hurled into this chaos, plagued by mistrust where truth is suppressed, and rather than a bridge to communication, words are unintelligible and communication is dead. And just on another note, inscribed in the word communication refers to the idea of bringing together people and ideas, but not anymore. It's driving people apart. The words we use do help form our national identity. Whoever controls the language controls the public debate. And that's from Marshall McLuhan in the 1960s. The more we remove God from our public life, the more we remove the moral vocabulary, the language that gives our public institutions meaning. Charles Chaput wrote, "Civic life is the arena where the struggle between truth and lies, justice and injustice takes place. Citizens have a duty to bring our beliefs to bear on every social, economic, and civic problem. It's not just a privilege, it's not just a right, it's a duty. And again, he sums this up quite well. Without the Christian underpinnings of our society, it will be up to us to decide what is wrong or right, or up to a governor, or a president, a dictator, or a bureaucrat. And our civilization will tear itself apart. Citizenship anywhere, he said, won't matter. That's hard to swallow. Every age of history, though, has its trials and opportunities. So for whatever reason, you and I are here at this point in time in history. And according to Aristotle, we need courage and fortitude. Author Donald DeMarco said, courage is fear that has said its prayers. Brookfield Academy's star of individuality has never been more important. Historical events don't just happen spontaneously. Institutions don't make decisions. People do. Individuals making many individual choices. CEOs, doctors, RNs, teachers, professors, plumbers. We all are responsible for our own individual choices. And that's what can change the world. Now, not everyone can do everything, but each of us can do something. So I have 4 suggestions. Where do we start? We have to change the culture and restore our civic engagement. Number 1, speak the truth. In whatever instances we find ourselves, do not self-censor. Remember logic and discourse, though, not name-calling. One way in which we differ from animals is our gift of speech and our ability to reason. So knowing the truth but self-censoring is just a waste of our gift of speech. Remember that saying, sticks and stones will break my bones, but names will never hurt me? Let's restore that, okay? When more people speak the truth, truth really does prevail. The crisis in truth is traced to individuals, not the institutions. Second, be very clear what the expression human dignity means, because it too is a victim of language abuse. Human dignity isn't some sappy, sentimental expression claiming people are special and have a right to be affirmed in their choices, no matter what those choices might be. Human dignity is grounded in the individual, in knowing who we are and whose we are. We are not a collective. You are a someone, not a something. And we do not use people, nor do we prey on groups of people to get the changes we want. I have a great image for individuality, which I can say later, but I'll move on. Then 3, philanthropic giving. Support the people, the organizations, the political candidates whose mission align with your values. Lastly, civic involvement. Re-engage in local governance. Vote, be a poll worker, run for office, and learn about how your county and municipal governments function. American citizenship, it is the exercise of our rights and responsibilities, but it's our responsibility to safeguard them through civic engagement, voting, virtue, and vigilance. And just a final word, all of these points culminate in what should be our proper understanding of freedom. Freedom is not just satiating all of our desires unencumbered. That's sheer willfulness or license. Freedom is not from something or from obstacles. Freedom is for something. As Lord Acton wrote, freedom is for the right to be able to do what we ought. And why? Because we are citizens, not subjects. Yeah.